To teach behavioral intervention to marginalized populations, facilitators face a strict paradox. If you teach pure personal accountability, you risk gaslighting participants about the brutal realities of systemic injustice. If you focus entirely on a rigged system, you strip away their individual agency. Think of the mind as an internal map, and the real-world economy as the external territory. A flawless map is completely useless if the shifting topography it tries to navigate is hostile. 2 sessions from the ROFA Academy on June 15, 2026, solve this paradox by separating the map from the territory. The pedagogy is encoded directly into these primary artifacts, 2 sets of handwritten facilitator notes. On the left is Valerie's morning session, on the right, Chris's follow-up session. Valerie's notes are filled with organic imagery. She sketches faces and flames to anchor emotional states. Chris's notes, however, are strictly architectural. He draws staircases and ladders to map external, geometric progression. These notes outline a sequenced, complementary architecture for behavioral intervention. The first vector targets the internal map, regulating emotional perception. The second vector targets the external territory, mapping the mathematical traps of the macroeconomic system. Teaching someone how to navigate economic traps will fail if their internal cognitive map is clouded by distorted emotions. Conversely, emotional regulation cannot pay rent or bypass a structural poverty trap. Both factors must operate in sequence. Valerie's morning session clears the internal map. Her primary objective is teaching participants how to strip distorted emotional reactions away from objective facts. The foundation of this vector is metacognition. Participants must learn to actively think about their own thinking. She introduces a strict taxonomy of cognitive distortions. Tactics like mind reading and fortune-telling are flagged as mental errors because they construct entire emotional narratives without a single piece of factual evidence. She specifically targets overgeneralization. Absolute words like always and never are linguistic traps. Believing you will always fail physically deters the brain from taking healthy, calculated risks. This diagram models her distortion scale. On one extreme, individuals magnify threats into catastrophic panic. On the other, they minimize threats into total denial. The protocol demands locating the center point, which consists entirely of actionable facts. When a behavior fails, Valerie enforces a direct protocol: explicitly acknowledge the failure and halt the repeating loop. Stop doing the thing that does not work. Even her doodles serve a pedagogical function. These sketches act as intentional visual anchors, creating easy retrieval cues for complex cognitive and emotional concepts. Clearing the internal map of these distortions is a strict prerequisite. Until an individual can separate their emotions from the data, they are incapable of seeing systemic reality accurately. Valerie tests this cognitive theory against high-stakes reality by introducing the Carmelo Hampton case. The objective facts are grim. Hampton, an 18-year-old black man, was handed a 30-year sentence by a jury completely devoid of minority representation. Applying the minimized distortion to this scenario means ignoring the glaring lack of minority representation and the sheer severity of a 30-year term. Doing so invalidates the mathematical reality of systemic racism in the courts. Applying the magnified distortion means focusing entirely on the rigged judicial system. This error concludes that because the system is biased, the individual has absolutely no agency. Valerie forces the room to the center. They must acknowledge the systemic bias of the Commonwealth Court, while simultaneously holding the personal accountability of a teenager choosing to bring a deadly weapon to a conflict. True accountability does not require denying systemic injustice. Instead, it uses metacognition to ensure that an unjust system does not become a fatalistic excuse for criminal behavior. Once the internal map is cleared of emotional distortion, the second vector begins. Chris's mid-morning session maps the hostile external territory. He introduces the concept of an economic phase transition. A phase transition is a threshold where the standard rules of rational financial behavior suddenly invert. This graph models the government benefits cliff. Normally, as earned income increases, total net resources increase linearly up to exactly $49,000. But crossing that phase transition with a $1 raise triggers a catastrophic $15,000 loss in medical benefits. Chris laps the necessary strategy. At this precise mathematical boundary, the rational choice is to refuse the raise or reject extra side work to maintain net resource stability. This structural reality dictates how individuals must interact with the bureaucratic systems processing them. Framing the welfare system as a phase transition changes the pedagogical output. Participants learn to mathematically navigate the system's rules, rather than viewing the resulting poverty strictly through the lens of a cognitive grievance. To explain the origins of threshold economies, Chris connects this modern macroeconomic reality to a historical case study, the biblical story of Joseph and the Pharaoh's dreams. The session treats the text as a study in political economy. By administering the grain supply during a severe famine, Joseph systematically consolidated property and established a massive threshold economy. The structural consequence was total. To secure survival resources, the free citizens of Egypt were converted into indentured servants. Chris extracts a distinct tactical lesson from this: asymmetric preparation. He uses the metaphor of growing tomatoes in buckets. Look at the logic tree for this strategy. If you secure your own food supply in a bucket, it does not matter if a famine hits or the land remains fertile. The strategy succeeds regardless of whether the initial prediction was accurate. Asymmetric preparation removes the need to perfectly predict the future. It allows individuals to build a strategy that maintains agency, regardless of the external environment. The curriculum only functions when both halves sequence correctly. Internal cognitive therapy must clear the map before structural economics can chart the territory. Combining these two vectors achieves a specific operational state within the participant: anti-fragility. The philosophical spine of this anti-fragility is explicitly written at the bottom of the facilitator's notes. Right and wrong irrelevant. What is, is. Acknowledging that the system is rigged is no longer a reason to surrender. It becomes another factual constraint that must be mapped, calculated, and outmaneuvered. Chris compares this to running up a downward escalator. Starting from the bottom develops a high degree of resilience and mechanical adaptation, the exact traits required to stay on course when the territory shifts. This dual-vector architecture builds the metacognitive clarity to recognize systemic barriers and provides the structural tools to navigate through them. It prepares the individual to succeed within the world exactly as it is.